And then I'd like to introduce Steve Sarowitz, who I happened to meet at the One Planet Summit about a month ago. I found out that he will be visiting San Diego during this Thanksgiving weekend, and I had asked him to give us a fireside talk. I'd like to read a short bio on Steve for those who are not as familiar with his background and accomplishments. Steve Sarowitz is founder and chairman of Paylocity, a publicly traded company, director of Payscape, a UK payroll provider, the co-chairman of Wafer Studios and founder of Wafer Theaters. He is also an international philanthropist with an interest in promoting unity by promoting universal education and advocating for the elimination of racism, sexism, nationalism, and religious prejudice. Steve served as executive producer for the award-winning documentary The Gate, Dawn of the Baha'i Faith, a groundbreaking documentary about the founding of the Baha'i Faith. Steve is an avid runner who has been inducted into the Chicago Area Runners Association Hall of Fame. Steve is married with 2 children and holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Illinois. Steve is a passionate Baha'i who has given presentations about the Baha'i vision of world unity at several universities, the Parliament of World Religions, and other venues around the world. Steve will be talking tonight on finding hope in a troubled world. Please help me welcome Steve Sarowitz.
Can you hear me with this mic? We good?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. So, first thing I'll start with, I'm going to teach a little bit about how Baha'is look at this. This is from a Baha'i perspective. So I've been a Baha'i for 8 years. I was raised Jewish. I had a Baha'i friend I was running with for 8.5 years, and he and his wife invited me to go to something called Rui, Baha'i study classes, and after a few years I became a Baha'i. I went to my wife, who's Catholic. I said, I'm a Baha'i now, and she said, no, you're not. You have to wait till after the bar mitzvah, which was 2.5 years away. I didn't make the bar mitzvah. I actually was invited to Israel to build a center for Jews and Arabs in Akko, Israel, by my friend who's not a Baha'i, who did not realize that Akko, Israel, is the spiritual center of the Baha'i faith, is our Mecca. So I went to Akko and had a complete spiritual transformation at the shrine of Baha'u'llah, and within less than 6 months I was a Baha'i. A year before the bar mitzvah, but here I am. It'll be 9 years in February. The world looks somewhat troubled right now, so it is a troubled world. There's war, in particular what's going on between Palestine and Israel, or I should say Hamas and Israel, to be more accurate, to see what the war's what's actually happening with what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, what's happening in places in Africa, the instability of many governments, the economic instability, the economic uncertainty, the political divide in this country, tremendous political divide. This is almost a country on the verge of civil war right now. And we have similar things happening in England, in France, in Europe, between the right and the left. There are major mental health issues throughout our society right now. There's literally a mental health crisis among young people. I just gave a speech. I was in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and my company, Payscape, is in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And there was a company, or a group there, called One Young World, and they had about 2,000 people there that had gathered in Belfast. And I thought, wow, I'd love to speak to them. They were talking about unity and mental health. But of course, I didn't know anyone there, and they had their agenda planned for a year, and they didn't know me at all. I was meeting with a hotel owner about a center we were going to build there, we are going to build there for Catholics and Protestants. And I said, I'd love to speak at this conference. And next thing you know, I was giving a 10-minute speech on mental health for 2,000 people at this conference. And my main point was this, that this mental health crisis is a spiritual crisis. It's not something we can solve without addressing the spiritual element of it. And that's what I really am here to say today, that we live in a spiritual world. We look at all these material problems and we forget that they're spiritual problems, that the root cause of all our problems in the world is spiritual. The material problems are reflections of a spiritual problem. So if we look at, for example, take Russia and Ukraine. What is the root spiritual cause? It's nationalism. And what is the cause of nationalism? Is the failure to realize the oneness of humanity. That someone who lives in Ukraine and someone who lives in Russia are looking upon the same God. And that perhaps temporal power, material wealth, which is what wars are generally about, is not important. If the leaders of the world understood, I've been very fortunate in business. I'm a wealthy man. I made the Forbes 400 a couple years. I didn't make it last year, but I made it for a couple years and still a billionaire. And yet, that's not important. No one should listen to anything I say because I'm a billionaire. It doesn't matter at all. I'm no better or no worse than anyone. The only thing that money can be used for is to contribute to the betterment of the world. If I do that, that's good, but even that shouldn't make you look up to me. That should just be something we should all do. Every one of us is given gifts, and we should share those gifts as we can. If the leaders of the world, the ones who are starting wars for money and power, realized how empty that is, this is a spiritual problem, not a material problem, we would solve all the problems in the world. Now we go to Israel and Palestine. Cousins. Genetically, I'm Jewish, 99+% Jewish, which means I'm a Palestinian, essentially. Genetically, you couldn't tell me from a Palestinian. If you look at me, of course, I'm a little bit too tall to be Jewish or Palestinian, but make me a little shorter and I look Palestinian or I look Jewish. If you look at Palestinians and Jews side by side, I've been to Israel 20 times. You can't tell them apart. They're cousins. And yet they're wanting to kill each other because one side worships the same God through Muhammad and the other through Moses. But Moses is Muhammad and Muhammad is Moses, just different eras. And Jesus is the two of them. If we take away the names and we forget about Moses and Muhammad and Jesus and we just say the messenger of God came and he told us at the heart of his message to love each other, that solves the problem, believe it or not. Because now we forget that some people are labeled Muslim, and some people are labeled Jewish, and some people are labeled Christian. Why? Why are some people Jewish and some people Muslim? Why are some people black and some people white? Why are some people from Mexico and some people from England and some people from America? All of these are accidents of birth, nothing more. But we look up at the same God, one God who created all of us. And so the spiritual problem is the failure to realize the oneness of humanity, that we are one human race. In 1985, scientists finally came to the conclusion that we're one human race. If you go back 50 years in the 1930s in the Field Museum in Chicago, where I'm from, there were statues which showed people of different races as if they were different species. The black and the white, etc., which is what people thought at that time, that black people and white people couldn't intermarry. It was against the law. And now we know we're one human race. Almost everybody who has followed the science at all knows we're one human race. But do we act like it? Still to this very day, we don't. And so this is a spiritual problem, not a material problem at all. The material answer is knowing intellectually that we're one human race. The material solution, but that's not a solution. The solution, sorry if I'm giving you feedback. Okay. Oh, you know what? I was touching my microphone. That's my problem. So the spiritual solution is knowing in our hearts. And the heart is really, this is the home. Baha'u'llah says, "Thy heart is my home, sanctify it for my descent." My heart is my home. The heart is what the problem is. Racism is a heart problem, not a head problem. Sexism is a heart problem, not a head problem. Might be a little bit in the head as well, but typically it's more of a heart problem. Nationalism is a heart problem. My country is better than your country. And it's hard to beat these problems intellectually. We have to beat them in the heart. We have to spread the faith, and we have to understand our faith has to revolve around oneness. Talking about the One Planet conference that we met at, there was a young woman, very good friends with her parents and with her as well. She is black, very light-skinned actually. She talked to a gentleman at the end of the conference who's a Christian, and he had said to her in the course of one conversation that, number one, slaves benefited from slavery, and two, he didn't really like this whole women's lib thing, that he thought it had gone too far. Now, he wasn't a mean person, he wasn't evil. I might disagree with him on a couple of those points, but he was raised in a certain sense, and he was raised in a religion that didn't emphasize the oneness of humankind, that didn't emphasize the equality of women and men. He didn't understand the essence of equality and what it means. Sure, women and men are different. I might get in trouble for saying that now, but women and men have some essential differences physically, and that's true. And that most men are, on average, not always, not particularly strong, so there's a lot of women who may be stronger than me, but on average, men are stronger. On average, men are faster. On average, women are more compassionate. Women are better at making peace. There are differences between men and women, and that's what he was emphasizing, and that's true. But what he missed, because he wasn't raised in a faith that talked about the equality of men and women, is that doesn't mean that women and men should not have absolutely equal respect and rights. And that should be the center of our world, that women should have every right to be educated. Women should have every right to go and pursue the career of their choice. Women should be able to vote. Women should have in the family, women and men, husband and wife, side by side, and be treated as equals or as helpmates, as Baha'u'llah says. So the differences should not be the cause of any lack of equality on the part of women and men. And so he had not gotten that. He had not understood race as a problem. He had not understood that racism was a problem. And I think the new racism in this country, for the most part, is that racism doesn't exist. It does exist. Yes, we're all equal. Yes, it's obvious we're all equal. Yes, we have an equal opportunity. But an equal opportunity means an equal opportunity. That means when I walk in the room, I get the same reaction as someone who's darker than me, which is still not the case. And until that is the case, to say it's not the case is actually racist. To deny the lack of equality in our country. And so you have to be raised to look for these things and to feel them in your heart and to feel the oneness. And part of feeling the oneness and why this is so important in battling racism is we can never win against the dragon of racism if we don't view each other as one. So it's not that person over there who I don't feel as if my brother is getting hurt. It's that my brother is getting hurt. My sister is getting hurt. You have to feel it deep in your heart. And then when you see this, when you feel this, when you're raised to this is why religion is important. When in your heart we feel we're one, we can start defeating. And it goes both ways in racism, because there is prejudice due to race on, we'll just talk black and white, there's a lot of shades. But just black and white, there's prejudices on both sides, and those sides both have to overcome their prejudice. Having said that, there's one side that's clearly the oppressor, and that side has more of a responsibility, in my opinion, on that side. Although it's interesting, because Jews are white passing, maybe not white. That's a whole longer conversation. I'm Middle Eastern in my background. But I pass as white, I walk through the world as white, and I accrue the benefits of being white, and therefore I'm responsible that because I have, as a friend of mine, a black friend of mine said, I have a lack of privilege. Because I have a lack, no one's coming and giving me anything because I'm white. It's just that they're not hitting me because I'm not white. that's what he said to me, and I thought about it, and I've always thought, yeah, he's right. It's not that, so a lot of people say, well, I didn't get anything special. Well, that's true, you didn't. But you also didn't get punched in the face when you got up in the morning. And I've been in a situation where I've been the only white person in a room with black people, and they didn't believe me because I was white. They didn't trust me because I was white. And I thought, I was really angry. And one night I was on a board, and one night where I just couldn't convince them of something. And I knew I was right. And I was sure I was right. And they didn't believe me because I was white, and it's true. And actually, we had a problem with our executive director, and I was making a point, and I had two major complaints from people who worked for him. One was white, one was black. The person who was black had told me don't give her name out unless I had to. I spent 3 hours getting beaten up because it was me basically saying, well, this white person said this person's not fit for the job. And there's other people as well. And finally, when I mentioned that a black person had also said it, the tone of the whole room changed. And I was very mad that night, went to bed angry that night. Got up the next morning, realized I'd make a very bad black person because they deal with it every day. Many black people, not everybody, but I'd say that people are dealing with racism every day. My wife is a woman of color. She deals with this stuff all the time. And so I realized that, okay, you know what? You just felt what it's like. How did you like it? And it made me more empathetic. And I've ever since then been grateful for that experience. I've had a couple experiences like that in my life, but just a couple. So 2 days in my life. We have to realize that this exists. We have to acknowledge it exists. But most importantly, we have to work together. The House of Justice wrote a letter on July 22nd, 2020. For those of you who don't know what the Universal House of Justice is, this is the highest Baha'i administrative body. They wrote a letter, which is my Bible on fighting racism. If anyone get July 22nd, 2020 letter to the Baha'is of the United States. And essentially, the essence of fighting has to be that we are one, and that nobody should be looked upon as the other, and that we have to fight side by side, not using conventional methods. Conventional methods are dividing into tribes. Your tribe has the power, we want it. No. Our tribe has the power, we want to keep it. No. There is no tribe. Our tribe is the human tribe. And when one person is treated unequitably, then all of us suffer. That's the way we have to look at it. It's not tribal. You cannot solve a problem like that with tribalism. And yet we try to solve all of our problems with tribalism. This is why the world is falling apart. Now what's interesting, and really where I find the hope as a Baha'i, is in the idea of dual processes. So the Baha'i faith teaches that there's a dual process going on right now. On the one hand, we have an old world order, which is hopelessly corrupt, cannot be fixed. It's based on, as I mentioned, those prejudices, racism and sexism and nationalism. It's based on superstition. It's based on corruption and greed. It's based on materialism over spirituality. And that destruction of that old world order is accelerating. And so this is what we see in the papers every day. The wars, the fighting, that feeling you get, that really uncomfortable feeling you get when you read the newspapers every day, if you read the newspapers every day. That's the old world order. Our economic systems are failing, our educational systems are failing, our political systems are failing. It feels like we're on unsteady ground. This is the root of a lot of the mental problems today, because it feels our climate system is not doing so well either. All of our systems are failing. And on the other hand, this is a dual process. While this is going on and while everything's falling and the sky is falling, we are headed into the greatest golden age that humanity has ever experienced. It doesn't feel like that. As a friend of mine said, it had to be a female friend who told me this. It's like we're birthing. We're going through the birth pangs of a great new age. And the birth pangs are not always fun. My mother told me I was a big baby. Of course, you can tell looking at me now. My mother's only 5'5". I was painful to bring into the world, but here I am now. And I've never had a baby, but I've been told by those who have that it could be a little painful. And it's like that now. We're birthing a new world order. And so while all of these big systems, these big oak trees that are old and dead are falling, new saplings are rising. And this new civilization is based on love and spirituality over materialism and unity over separation and tribalism. oneness over separateness, one human race versus separating into races, women being equal to men instead of sexism. It's based on science and reason as opposed to superstition. All of these things are rising, and you can see these rising. And what you do, if you look at the news, start looking at the news a little differently. Every time you see something bad, look for something good. And by the way, the good things aren't on page 1, they're on page 20. So for example, I'll give an example. George Floyd, absolutely terrible. We watched a man be killed right in front of us. It's still hurtful even to say that name right now. It just brings back pain to watch a man suffering like that. And yet that suffering brought out people rising up and saying, we want justice. All over the world, millions of people arose and said, we want justice. And it made changes. Maybe some of those changes were short-lived. Maybe some of those changes were wrong-headed. Maybe they were just check the box. But there are people who were changed by George Floyd permanently. And the world was changed permanently. And every time you see something bad, look for the good. And the good is always bigger, by the way. God is good. By the way, God is not a Christian God, a Jewish God, a Muslim God, a Baha'i God. God is simply God. And God is good. And so, the strongest force of the world, because God does exist. And since God exists, or God is not a he or she, but God, this goodness, this spirit, this great spirit that created all of us, that runs, without God, the whole world dies instantly. We don't exist. Life exists because of God. There is no force stronger in the universe than God, and God is good. If God is good, people are worried now about the Antichrist coming. The beast is going to rise. Did anyone ever hear about the chip you're going to get with the COVID shot? Raise your hand if you ever heard about that. Did you guys get your chip? Does anyone know where that comes from? Raise your hand if you know where that comes from. It's religious, Did anyone know it's from a religious source? So before COVID, Revelation 13, 16, 17, and 18, you will need a mark on your right hand or your forehead in order to buy or sell. And the beast is a man. The number of the beast is 666. Is that scary enough? So they took this and they morphed it. Before COVID ever existed, they morphed it into you're going to need a chip in order to buy or sell. They're worried about the Antichrist. Again, people are worried about this powerful Antichrist. Thinking, reading the Bible where it says God is supreme. Good is supreme. The Spirit is supreme over material. And they're worried about the material. It's like, why? So anyway, so they're worried about this. So when the COVID shot came, they morphed this idea of a chip into the shot. By the way, I'm going to scare you now. I believe literally in the mark of the beast. I do. I think it's absolutely true. Because the Baha'i writings talk about it. Actually, they don't talk about the mark of the beast, but they talk about the beast. It says in the 660s, the Umayyads took over Islam. The Umayyads killed, it says in 2 chapters earlier in the Bible, there's 2 witnesses, and the beast will kill the witnesses, which they do. The Umayyads killed Ali, the chosen successor of Muhammad, and took Islam into a darker direction. But here's what I found out on my own. Looked it up, and there was a mark on your right hand, if you were a Christian, in the year 666, in the actual year 666, in Jerusalem. And the people giving you that mark were the Umayyads, who the Baha'i writings actually identify as the beast. And that mark was a tattoo, which would be on your right hand, in order to buy or sell. So I believe it, since it happened. Wow. But it is not a chip in the year 2021. The thing is, we have a lot of superstition now in the name of religion. If we just start and say, what is the thing that runs through the center of every religion? Every religion. How many people are raised Jewish? Raise your hand if you were raised Jewish. Maybe me. Raised Christian. Raised Muslim. Raised Baha'i. All of us were taught the golden rule. Every one of us. By the way, if I missed one, sorry about that. Hindu, Buddhist. And every religion is the golden rule. It's the love of God and the love of humanity. And so that is the heart of religion. Superstition has no part to that. And so if we start understanding religion for what it really is, which is to bind us together, religion right now is one of the greatest forces, the way it's being used today, for evil, for war. It needs to be retooled. It needs to be renewed. And we have to understand that religion must be a part of the solution. It must be. I was talking to my son's friends, they're Christians. My son is a Christian. My son was raised Jewish, and he's now a Christian, which I'm happy about because he has faith. I don't care what his faith is. We were talking beforehand. Faith is one. Whether you're a Christian or a Jew, a good Jew is a good person, a good Christian is a good person, a good Muslim is a good person, a good Baha'i is a good person. If you're really following your faith, religion must be rethought. Right now, religion is primarily inherited. Most people do one of two things. They either inherit the religion of their forefathers, or they reject the religion of the forefathers. They inherit it and say, I don't want that, so they have nothing, or they follow the religion of their forefathers. And I think one of the first tenets of the Baha'i faith is very important, the independent investigation of truth. We need to each ask ourselves what we believe, and then find the religion that matches it. Instead of saying, I'm this religion because I was born into this religion. I was born Jewish. I still love Judaism. Love it even more today, much more today than I ever did when I was a Jew for 49 years. I love Judaism much more. In fact, I talk to rabbis all the time, have great conversations. I live in a mostly, or very, very largely Jewish town, get along very well. I defend my Jewish friends all the time against anti-Semitism. I can do this as a Baha'i with a smile, because I understand that Judaism is just an earlier version of the Baha'i faith. So is Christianity, so is Islam. They're all one. The idea of the oneness of religion is something that we must understand. If we don't understand this, we're going to keep advocating for my religion being right and yours being wrong. Religion must be turned into a force for good, and a force, as my shirt says, so powerful as the light of unity that can illuminate the whole earth. That's a quote from Baha'u'llah. Religion must be turned into a force for unity. And if we do that, we can solve these seemingly intractable problems. The other thing I think is really important to realize, we were talking about, I put up a quote from Abdul-Baha about the oneness of religion, and I have a friend who's not a very religious guy, and he says, well, there's no hope, and he started talking about the wars, and I said, stop for 1 second. Just forget about that war or any individual problem we have right now. Raise up a little bit, take the 20,000-foot view. Since 1844, 75% of the inventions in the history of the world have been invented. We have had revolutions in women's rights and civil rights. We have outlawed slavery in virtually every country. If you go back in 1844, there was slavery in almost every country. Now it's illegal. Women were slaves everywhere. Does anyone know the first year women could vote in what country? Anybody?
Was it New Zealand was the first?
And what year?
No.
1893.
Oh, wow.
Pretty recently in history. So, just a little over 100 years ago, the first woman could vote. So women couldn't be educated. We didn't have anything called interfaith. When was the first big interfaith conference?
With all due respect on the women equality, many other tribes within Native Americans and within Africa recognized women not only as equals within council, but also equals in creating ideas for the benefit of the tribe. I just want to.
Oh yeah. So, but the ideas are good no matter where they are. So whether Native Americans have that idea, or Christians have the idea, or Jews or Baha'is, but from a worldwide perspective, women's equality as a whole was not a big thing. There were exceptions, but if we take the whole world, women's equality was virtually non-existent if you took the great majority of the world in 1844. So you're right, there were exceptions to it. There were exceptions to a lot of things, but they were the exception, not the rule. By the way, it was great that there were exceptions. There were people fighting to get rid of slavery before 1844, but they were the exception, not the rule. And so what I'm saying is we live in a world that's so different that we couldn't recognize it. And what really my point to my friend and to really everyone is that we are progressing. And to your point, it's not like the world didn't exist before 1844. There were people fighting against slavery, for equality for women. There were people who believed that we're one human race before 1844. But these ideas were in the minority. When Baha'u'llah was revealing these ideas in the late 1800s, they were radical ideas. The idea that the earth is but one country and mankind is citizens. The idea of the full equality of women and men. The idea that all religions are one. That's still a radical idea to most people. So these ideas are getting out there and they're getting more popular very quickly. And this is much more important than any individual war. So if we raise up to the 20,000 foot view, humanity is moving forward, and we're moving forward very quickly. And that is actually a big part of the problem. What happens when you move and you change? It's painful. Has anyone ever gone through a growth spurt? I grew 8 inches in 2 years. So you can see I grew a lot. But as we grow, as we change, sometimes it's painful. We're changing. We're in this birth pain, these birth pains of a new age. And so the world is changing, and it's very painful to look at. And these older structures are falling apart because they can't handle these new forces. So the hope is in the new. I'm going to scare you a little bit now. And the House of Justice said a couple years ago that the next 2 decades will present some of the greatest challenges in the history of humanity, ever. There's going to be some darkness. There's going to be some pain. There's going to be some fear. It even scares me some days. But ultimately, I realize that the end is good. And ultimately, even in the darkest of times, we must have our faith. And the more we have our faith, the less the darkness matters and the more we see the light. Abdul-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, was in prison for 55 years, from the age of 9 to 64. And someone asked him what it was like to be in prison. He said there was no prison. He said prison was just a physical prison, but he was not really in prison because he was always free. He said he was freer in that prison than other people who were outside the prison. Prison is in our minds and in our souls. And so as this world goes through this dark time, it is incumbent that each and every one of us look inside and understand the spiritual truths and realize that the material is not important. Money's not important. All the things we think are important are not important. Abdul-Baha lived with none of those things. He was poor. He was in prison. He was in terrible prison. He was in one of the worst prisons, actually maybe the worst prison in the world. It was the worst prison in the Ottoman Empire. He was in prison from the age of 9 to 64. Imagine that. And yet he came out and gave speeches all over the world after this that inspired thousands and still inspires millions of us like me today. We don't have to worry about, don't worry about the material world. There's going to be a lot of material problems over the next couple of decades, I'm sorry to say. But that's not what matters. What matters is, at the end of this, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And that light is the brightest light in the history of humanity. The greatest golden age. After every prophet comes a golden age. After Moses, the kingdom of Israel. After Zoroaster, the great Persian Empire. After Buddha, the great Maurya Empire, which stretched out at its peak to 2 million square miles. After Jesus, the great Byzantine Empire. 3 years of ministry and a great empire that lasts over 1,000 years. After Muhammad, the first caliphate, the golden age of Islam that gave us algebra and algorithms and alchemy, and the first university by a Muslim woman in Morocco. There's always a golden age after a prophet. We're coming to the great Baha'i golden age, and it will be worldwide, the first worldwide golden age. This is what we're coming into. You all can read, those of you who aren't Baha'is, can read the Baha'i writings for yourself. You want a really scary book at first is Promised Day Has Come by Shoghi Effendi. It starts out and you read the first couple paragraphs and you want to go hide under a rock for the rest of your life. And then as you read the book, you realize that the end is glorious. The end is this great worldwide Baha'i Commonwealth based on justice, world peace, a peace that the world has never known. That's what we're headed towards. So we are headed towards world peace. We are headed towards unity. We are headed towards a society that's so great, according to the Baha'i writings, that we can't even imagine how great it will be. So don't be alarmed when you see a little darkness. Don't be alarmed when you see a little bit of the old world order coming unhinged. It's very important that during this hurricane, Shoghi Effendi spoke of this hurricane we're going to be in, that we stay at the eye of the storm, the calm part. And the eye of the storm is in our souls. As we grow our spirits, as we stay spiritually grounded, and what does that mean? It means that we can't be caught up in the political fighting and the wrangling. We can't be caught up in this anger. This side is right and that side is wrong. There is no side. There's only one side, and that's humanity. We're all one human family. The more we get to that point and we make that central to everything we do. I was asked, how has this affected your world? Everything I do, every company I run, my nonprofit work, everything I do is based on the oneness of humanity. And so if you make that the center, and if you make your center strong, this hurricane can't affect you. So with that, let me open it up to questions, because I know that there's probably a few things, since we're talking about our troubled world. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts to share?
Yeah, so you say there's no sides, right? So obviously you mentioned the two conflicts, Russia and Ukraine. I believe there's a right or wrong.
Yes.
And same thing with Hamas and Israel. So you have to stand on the side that you believe is right.
Okay, so yes, that's a great point. So the point is there a difference between Hamas, which is a terrorist group, and Israel, which is a flawed but democratically elected country? Yes, of course. It's not a terrorist group against a terrorist group, so there is a difference there. The reason why I say there's no sides is because the side part, I should probably say it, there is sometimes false equivalencies. There's no equivalency between what Hamas did, and even if Israel isn't perfect in how it responds, there's no equivalency there, so I get that. Same thing with Russia and Ukraine. Here's where there's no sides. There is no difference in God's eyes between a Russian and a Ukrainian. There's really no sides. There's somebody who's wrongfully started a war in both cases. A war is wrong. There's no sides between an Israeli, a Jew, and a Palestinian, whether they be Christian or Muslim. That's where I'm saying there's no sides. We are all equal in the eyes of God. So yes, there are differences and there is justice. And Baha'u'llah also says justice is the best beloved of things in my sight. So turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me. So I get that. There is justice and there is right and wrong. I can say I dislike what Hamas did on October 7th. I was there. I heard about it. I talked to someone who lived through it right after it happened. But I cannot say I dislike someone because they're Palestinian. That's when you're selecting sides. Besides, if you try to do that with Palestinians, there's 2 million Palestinians who live in Gaza and 2 million who live in Israel. Which side do you want? That's just on the Palestinian side. If you're talking about sides. Does that make sense?
It does.
Any other thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
So I would say, a lot of what you're saying and a lot of what you've said and talked about is a very easy group, I think, for you to say that to. And I think, as you were going, you got a lot of heads that nodded. In your experience and in your nonprofits and where you've gone, can you speak to or talk about the difficulty and the successes in changing the minds of those who are, as you mentioned, nationalistic, materialism, and those who would probably be a more difficult group than this one?
O friend, in the garden of thy heart, plant naught but the rose of love. And from the nightingale of affection and desire, loosen not thy hold. Treasure the companionship of the righteous, and eschew all fellowship with the ungodly. There are people that you can't convince, that you can't change. But, actually not even but, and, because Abdu'l-Baha didn't like the word but, there are people that you may not be able to change overnight, but our job is to put love out there. I have had people that I can't change, or at least I couldn't. Maybe Abdu'l-Baha, who is much better than me, could have changed them. Sometimes you have, the reason why I just said what I said is sometimes you have to walk away. Sometimes there's somebody who just doesn't want to who wants to fight, and you have to walk away. One of my heroes that I actually recently got to meet is Daryl Davis. And has anyone ever heard of Daryl Davis? Raise your hand if you've heard of Daryl Davis. Well, now you're gonna hear about him, which is wonderful. And maybe when I tell you what he's done, you'll have heard of him. He is a black man who's a musician who's taken 200 people out of the KKK.
Oh, yeah.
And what he did was go befriend them and love them, even though he disagreed with them. So what I would say in all cases, when someone is like that, befriend them and love them, if you can, if they'll let you, and you can change minds. I sat at a dinner with Daryl Davis, and the guy right next to Daryl was the former head of, I think, the Nazi party in America. And he was great. I was giving him a hard time, actually. So here's a former Jew giving the former head of the Nazi party in America a hard time. We had a great conversation. I was giving him a hard time because he'd been dating his girlfriend for 5 years, and he hadn't married her yet. So I'm like, you should go marry that woman. And but we were having the fact that I was able to kid with him, and that he didn't shoot me. It's a good thing. And he took it very well. And so, but just the fact that we're sitting at the table together and having a conversation, I've seen that happen over and over again. One of my favorite events this year, I have a theater, and we had a movie come in, and it was about a Muslim, or actually a Christian man who had served in the army, who hated Muslims. He had seen terrible things in the Middle East, and he hated Muslims, and he wanted to blow up a mosque. And he went to blow up the mosque, and they were so friendly to him, they loved him so much, they ended up becoming a Muslim. And that's how we do it. You love them. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But here's the thing, one person at a time. And Abdul-Baha did this. It's one of my favorite stories about Abdul-Baha. He had a man who was a Muslim clergyman, and he hated Abdul-Baha and publicly would denigrate him for over 20 years. It was 24 years. He yelled. Abdul-Baha would give him food and clothes every year, and he would never even look at him or acknowledge him. He would publicly say terrible things about him. And finally, after 24 years, he looked at Abdul-Baha and realized that Abdul-Baha was being friendly to him, and realized he'd been nice to him all these years, and they became friends after that. And look, if you can wait 24 years, you could probably change everybody. There are some times, like in the case of Hamas, where you have to defend your family, and you can't be nice right away. But there are probably supporters of Hamas, and maybe even Hamas fighters, who can be changed. And by all means, we should try to change everybody. And again, understand that they're human beings. The starting point of everyone you deal with is that they're a human being. We may not like everything they do, or everything they think, or agree with everything they think, but they are us and we are them.
Marianne Williamson is a spiritual writer and
I know.
and she's running for president. And I really love the things that she has to say, the unity that's so much. Does the Baha'i have any predictions about a woman becoming president, or?
None whatsoever. Baha'is don't really get involved in partisan politics. I couldn't tell you, I could not speak for the Baha'i faith. Anything I've said tonight, by the way, is my own personal opinions. Don't take it as this is the Baha'i faith. This is one person's understanding of the Baha'i faith. I like Marianne Williamson too. I like the fact that she's a spiritual person. I like the fact that she's a woman. I would vote for a woman over a man. All other things equal. It's about time we had a woman president, personal opinion, but just take that as a personal opinion. I happen to like her.
There's no, in the readings that you said when you talked about the 666 and that, there's nothing that really has a focus on this is what is gonna happen in
Oh, yes.
the future.
So we are going to get to the Baha'i Commonwealth. We are going to be, in the future, most people in the world will be Baha'is. In the future, we'll be united. In the future, we'll have one human race. It'll be acknowledged. We'll understand that the earth is but one country, mankind is citizens. These ideas that Baha'u'llah put out 150 years ago will be widely accepted. So in the future, we will be done with all this terrible hate and war. There is a very, very bright future. The writings are very clear about that. So yes, we will get through this.
If I could just also.
Yeah,
add,
sure.
a
Probably better than me,
response.
see, a
No,
better
not-
woman.
Not at all. But there is within the writings, if it helps to know, a prediction that in the future, women will occupy every single arena and space within this world. And specifically, when women occupy positions of politics, all war will cease. That is the prediction of the Baha'i faith when it comes to women in these positions.
Except, it doesn't make a specific prediction about a woman president, but
No.
that kind of implies that. And of course, why not? Any other thoughts? Yes.
You're speaking about humanity needing to come from a heart space. Is there a method, mode, recommendation that you can give, whether it's Baha'i or otherwise, to have people, whether they're of a particular religious bent or not, to start coming from a heart space?
Baha'u'llah said, swim in the ocean of my words. That's my recommendation. I believe that Baha'u'llah was the prophet for our age, is the prophet for our age, and that his words are the words that humanity needs today. That doesn't mean that we can't read the Quran or the Bible or the Buddhist writings. They're also very good. But in terms of what we need in this age, the Baha'i writings are, first of all, more comprehensive than, in terms of volume, than all the other writings combined. But I think immersing ourselves in the ocean of Baha'u'llah's words would be a really good start. There's a lot of beautiful Baha'i writings. I'm in love with the Baha'i writings. But, like I said, I love the Bible. I think all the writings of God, whether it be the Gitas, whether it be the Quran or the Old Testament or the New, all of that's wonderful. But the Baha'i writings have a special place in my heart.
And do you think there's another mode other than religion, or spirituality, to get to that place?
There's a-
or in addition to?
I'd say they all work together. There's a oneness of all things. So spirituality and religion, here's what I would say, that many people are looking for spirituality outside the realm of religion, and that's because what they've seen in the name of religion is a dead body. Think of the spirituality as the heart, and religion as the body, and if you rip out the heart, then you see a very unattractive dead body. But if you rip the heart out from the body, the heart also dies. The two must work in tandem. So I think spirituality is great, but ultimately it needs the guidance and the structure of religion to truly thrive. But religion, when properly used, not religion as we see it today, more often than not being improperly used. What we see so often today is tradition and superstition in the name of religion. We don't need that. In fact, what Abdul-Baha said is if religion is a source of strife and conflict, it's better to have no religion. And to leave such a religion would truly be a religious act. So I'm not talking about religion my religion is right and yours is wrong, and a lot of the other things we see. But I'm talking about religion as a true guide on how to lead our lives, how to walk through the world. Yes, religion is very necessary, extremely necessary, but only when used properly. It's a very powerful tool. And spirituality is the heart of religion, and they're not in competition. They work together.
Steve, can I ask you a question? Just recently you asked to raise our hands if we were raised as Baha'is or Jewish or Christian. After listening to you, really, can I raise my hand now again? If you ask if you are raised as Jewish, I'm going to raise my hand. And if you ask if you're going to raise as Christian, I'm going to raise my hand.
Sure.
And if you ask as Muslim, I'm going to raise my hand because as a Baha'i, actually, you're raised in all of them.
Of course.
There is no difference. So I'm sorry I didn't raise my hand in every single question you asked. I wanted to clarify that.
Well, people say, am I Jewish still? And I say, I am as long as I can be Christian. And I'm Christian as long as I can be Muslim. And I'm Muslim as long as I can be Baha'i. They're all beautiful when done properly. The difference is the social laws and teachings of the Baha'i faith are for this age. So some of the teachings, I was just asked by my son's friend, what do you think about some of the laws of the Old Testament in Leviticus? I said, well, some of them are no longer applicable because they're a few thousand years old. But the essence of the truth of the religion is one, still.
How do you differentiate between
A religion and a philosophy.
Religion has God, and a philosophy does not. Religion is really God-centered, and philosophy, I think, is more man-made, and a religion is more divinely inspired. I'm not saying philosophy is bad. Philosophy is good. It's very interesting, and I like philosophy, but I tend to be more religious-oriented, and there's probably philosophy even within religion, but I think the element of God and the attribution of God and his prophets is very important. So a lot of people think Buddhism is a philosophy, but I would disagree, and I would say it's absolutely a religion. That some ways has devolved into a philosophy because people don't realize it's a religion. It's an older religion, so some people don't realize it's a religion, but it's definitely a religion, especially how it's practiced in the East. So, but yeah, if there's a God, and if there's a divine messenger like a Buddha or a Christ or a Baha'u'llah, then it would be a religion. And then I'll say something maybe controversial, but Scientology isn't a religion. It's a organization that was started by a science fiction writer who wrote a book called Dianetics, which doesn't mention God or religion or anything. It's only religion to save for taxes. Well, that's not a religion. Religion has to have a prophet. Religion has to have a founder who came from God. And all the major religions, whether it be Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they all come from God. The same God, from a Baha'i perspective anyway. Some people will fight me on that.
Could you talk a little bit about your understanding on why there's no clergy in the Baha'i faith?
Well, the independent investigation of truth is very important. So this is only my perspective, we don't need it anymore. In 1800, before the modern age, 12% of the world was literate. Today, the latest figures I saw were 86 point something percent. So it's basically a complete reversal. So now there's like 13, 14% of the people in the world are still illiterate. Then it was 12% literate. So when 88% of the people couldn't read, we needed someone to read the holy writings for them and to tell them this is what it says. Now we don't need that anymore. That's number one. Number two, independent investigation of truth. It's very important for us to understand it ourselves. In the Hidden Words, Baha'u'llah says to know of your own knowledge, to see with your own eyes is very important, and that's justice. And if it's one person telling us their truth, what if their truth isn't true? And that's how you get. So if you have people who are able to see things with their own eyes, know of their own knowledge, that's extremely powerful. Independent investigation of truth. And the last thing I'll say on that is that God's word is perfect. And so if I tell you, look, I know what it says, and here's what I think it means, I can only do harm. Because I can never be as good as God. So, I'm just saying let's say I was clergy, if I was clergy. Anybody who's clergy is an imperfect human. So from a Baha'i perspective, the messengers of God are perfection. And so if you have an imperfect person telling you about the perfection, that's always a negative. So the closest way to God is to go straight to the Baha'i writings, straight to the Quran, straight to the Bible, and the Bible, of course, is not straight from God, but it's close. It's divinely inspired. And so go straight to the writings themselves. That's always better than someone interpreting it for you, on average. And clergy, the other thing is clergy want to hold their power. And so then you have a problem where the next prophet comes and they say, and Baha'u'llah writes this, that in every age, the divines, the religious leaders have always held people back from getting the new word because they want to protect their flock. But it's never been their flock. It's always God's.
Do you have any solutions with the internet, since so much of the writing now can be totally false?
Yeah, you have to change people's hearts. You have to teach people from a very young age. I just invested in a company called Tiny Souls, and it's about teaching virtues at a very young age. We need to teach every child at a very young age love, kindness, mercy, compassion, honesty, and truth, and justice. And if a child at a very young age learns these things, they won't grow up into someone who's going to actually do fake news for a living.
I just want to say, as a young child, I had virtuous feelings. I did not have divisional feelings. I was brought up in South Africa. My father was Jewish, and he had to convert to be a Christian so that my parents could get married. And I learned all of these things from my parents and watching them with all different people. I had a black nanny that took care of me, and I didn't see any difference. One day I looked and I said, I had a realization my skin is not the same color as hers, and that's what they were speaking about. But inside of me, I had love. I felt love. I didn't feel division at all. And so when I read the teachings of Baha'u'llah, I really felt great. Like you said, you're in love with the teachings. They're just so beautiful. They just touch your heart so strongly, and they bring in such a great light and love to me that I wanted to be part of that, you know, and that's what inspired me. But, you know, with the young children, I think that inside of them, whether just being a human being, that you have that love, and then people, the adults are showing you all these different things. But how I survived my parents and everything was because I believed in love.
Well, the young child naturally feels love and all of those divine virtues. We're taught hate. Our natural state is love.
Right.
Our happy state is love. And you know, why do we read why do we follow the moral guidance of God? Because that brings us to our happy state. Although nowadays a lot of young people say, well, I want freedom, I don't want these rules. If we look at it that way, that's true. But they're not to be imposed on us against our will, they're to be embraced as guidance for a happy life. If we look at it that way, this is a gift from God, but it's not imposed upon us against our will, it's our choice. It's a much better way to look at it. This guidance from God is a gift to us. And it's to restore, as you said, our natural state. Our natural state is love.
Right.
And unity.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions? Yes, sir.
I'm very interested in, I believe the company was named Tiny Souls.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind expanding on what you're doing there?
Well, my friend came to me and said, I'm starting this little app. She said, it's going to just have some songs and we're going to do virtues. I said, that's great. How much do you need? And she said, I think it needed $20,000 or $30,000. And she was going to make this little app. She already had made this little app with her husband. I said, would you consider making it a little bit bigger? I said, like $1 million bigger. And she went and I said, here's what I'd like you to do if you're interested. Make it into a whole media platform, because it needs, what you're doing is great, but it would be better as a media platform. So now she's making a media platform. She hired a CEO. I said to her, well, you could be the CEO, or you could hire a CEO. And she found a CEO she likes, who I like as well, and we hired someone to actually do the business plan. And so what they're doing is they're creating really high quality media content, not just songs, but characters and videos for children. And so right now there's a few trying to do it, but I don't think there's anything really doing it well. Sesame Street and Daniel Tiger are probably two of the highest basically performing, and they're old. And they're not as good as even the originals were. Sesame Street is not as good as it was 60 years ago, and Daniel Tiger is not as good as Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It's time that someone does this better. And I think it's worth a shot. You know, if they succeed, wonderful. That's one of those investments I made that I said, I don't care if I ever get my money back, I think it's worth trying. But I do expect to get my money back. I do think that there's, well, actually I gave the investment to my foundation, so if it makes money, great, then it's not my money anyway, still it's going to be given away. But I do think that the foundation will make its money back.
Did you make your bar mitzvah?
I did. So I went to my kids a year before the bar mitzvah. I went to the rabbi and I said, can I be a Baha'i? And he said, I thought you were a Baha'i already. Because at that point, I couldn't open my mouth without talking about Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i faith. I had this complete spiritual transformation. And then I went to my kids and I said, can I become a Baha'i now? And they said, but Dad, we're having I said, please, I'll still go to the bar mitzvah, I'll still pay for the bar mitzvah. They said, okay. And then I went to my wife, who was the hard one. I said, well, the kids and the rabbi already said yes, and she had no choice. So I did go to the bar mitzvah. And I still love my kids. And my son tells me he loves me every time I talk to him, so that's all I need in life. And my daughter's perfect. She's a very, very good Jew, and if she was a Christian, she'd be a very good Christian. If she was a Muslim, she'd be a very good Muslim, and if she was a Baha'i, she'd be a phenomenal Baha'i. Any other thoughts or questions? And that's okay, I will publicly say she's perfect.
No pressure.
No pressure. Well, thank you everyone tonight. Hopefully I added a little bit to you.